Imagine waking up and discovering that it's not the year 2025 but 1727. Not because of a time machine, but because someone added 300 years to our calendar. That's the core of the phantom time hypothesis. A theory so bizarre, it sounds like science fiction. And yet, it was proposed by a respected German historian. His name is Heribert Illig. In 1991, he shook the world of historical scholarship with one question: what if the early Middle Ages never happened? Specifically, the years between 614 and 911 AD. What if they were fabricated, inserted into history for political or religious reasons? And what we call the Dark Ages were nothing but a clever illusion. No kings, no wars, no castles. Just stories, written centuries later to cover up a chronological lie. But why would anyone do this? And more importantly, could it actually be true? To find out, we have to go back to the roots of our calendar. The one we use every day, the Gregorian calendar. It was introduced in 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII to fix a problem in the old Julian calendar. The Julian system had a small error. It overestimated the solar year by 11 minutes. Over centuries, that mistake added up. By the 1500s, the calendar was 10 days off. So, the Pope made a correction. He skipped 10 days to bring the calendar back in line with the seasons. October 4th, 1582 was followed by October 15th. But here's where things get strange. Illig noticed something odd about this correction. The Julian calendar should have accumulated 13 days of error, not just 10, which suggests 300 years might be missing or never existed at all. Illig believed those phantom centuries were inserted into history later by powerful men with something to gain. But who would benefit from inventing time? Illig points his finger at one man, Holy Roman Emperor Otto III. Otto ruled in the early 11th century, but Illig claims Otto wanted to live in the year 1000, a symbolic date loaded with religious meaning. So he moved the clock forward, along with Pope Sylvester II and chroniclers of the time. Together, they forged documents and histories including the life of one very specific emperor, Charlemagne, the great king of the Franks, the father of Europe, a man whose existence is central to medieval history. But Illig says Charlemagne never existed, at least not the way we've been told. He argues that the records of Charlemagne's reign are suspicious to perfect to legendary, filled with idealized battles and impossible details, like a myth passed off as history. And the evidence doesn't stop there. Illig points to archaeological gaps, a strange lack of material evidence from the 7th to 10th centuries, fewer buildings, fewer coins, fewer artifacts, compared to the time periods before and after. He calls it a historical vacuum, a hole in time, waiting to be noticed. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. He also examines written documents, manuscripts and chronicles from that era. Many of them survive only in later copies, with no originals to compare. That's suspicious, he argues. If the only records of that era come from centuries later, how do we know they're real? We trust them because we want to, because they fit the story we've already accepted. But what if the story itself is wrong? Illig says it is. He believes humanity skipped 3 centuries, that we live in a time bubble built on fiction, that we've been living a life for over 1,000 years. A bold claim, but not without critics. Historians around the world rejected the idea. They called it fringe pseudoscience, a conspiracy theory dressed as history, and yet, the theory refuses to die. It continues to circulate in books, blogs, and debates because it touches on something deeper, a fear that time itself can be manipulated, that reality is not as solid as we think, and that history, our collective memory, can be rewritten, whether by accident or design. But is the phantom time hypothesis just a fantasy, or is there something hidden in plain sight? In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into the strange anomalies of medieval Europe, the gaps, the duplications, the inconsistencies. We'll look at the missing architecture, the recycled kings, the eerie coincidences, and ask the question once again, what if those 300 years never happened? They say history repeats itself, but what about the parts we forgot? Welcome to Echoes of History, the channel where we dig up the dusty corners of the past to uncover the weird, the wild, and the wait, what? Stories they didn't teach you in school. Grab your curiosity and maybe a cup of tea, because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. In the last chapter, we explored a shocking idea, that 300 years of European history may be a complete fabrication. But now we dive deeper into the historical shadows of the early Middle Ages, a time we think we know yet perhaps never truly existed. Let's begin with the buildings. Across Europe, architecture tells the story of civilization. But from 614 to 911 AD, something strange happens. There's a lull, a gap. Very few structures can be reliably dated to this period: churches, castles, fortifications, either absent or suspiciously misdated. Compared to the explosion of construction before and after, it feels empty, like Europe paused, or like that era was later imagined. Some argue that stone simply didn't survive, that wooden structures vanished with time. But even in the soil, there's less than expected, fewer layers, fewer finds. As if centuries collapsed into decades. Next, we look at texts. The written word is the backbone of recorded history. Chronicles, letters, charters, biographies, and yet, many documents from this period are suspiciously clean, to consistent in language, to perfect in style. Some appear to be copies of copies made hundreds of years later, with no original in sight. Illig finds this deeply suspicious. He claims that monks and scribes may have retroactively forged records to give weight to a fabricated timeline. Why? Power, legitimacy, control. A forged past gives authority in the present. Kings trace their lineage to false emperors. Churches justify their power through ancient precedent. Time becomes a tool, a weapon in the hands of those who write it. And then there's astronomy, a science immune to human manipulation, or is it? Eclipses are key to dating ancient events. Celestial mechanics are predictable and precise. But even here, there are problems. Some eclipses recorded in the early Middle Ages don't match the sky. The calculations are off, suggesting that these events may have been planted in the past, copied from older records, or fabricated entirely. Illig claims this is no coincidence. He believes the phantom years were padded into the calendar, a kind of historical inflation. More time on paper, but not in reality. He even finds patterns of repetition. Dynasties and rulers that mirror each other across centuries, the same names, the same battles. Like echoes history repeating itself too perfectly. Could these be duplications? Stories recycled under new names. He points to Byzantine emperors and Germanic kings with overlapping traits, suggesting a kind of narrative cloning. And then, of course, there's Charlemagne, the centerpiece of Illig's theory, the man whose empire defines the early medieval era. But even Charlemagne's biography is filled with red flags. His campaigns cover an implausible amount of land. His achievements are exaggerated, almost mythic. His court was said to be the beacon of learning. Yet almost no first-hand accounts exist. Most of what we know was written long after his death, by authors with an agenda, to elevate his image, to shape a narrative. Illig sees a pattern, a glorious past, written in reverse, fabricated to explain the present. But even more puzzling are the calendar systems, the Byzantine, the Islamic, the Chinese calendars, none align perfectly. Discrepancies emerge when cross-referencing dates, making it harder to confirm the Gregorian timeline. Time, it seems, is not a global constant, and that opens the door to error or invention. Critics argue Illig is cherry-picking data. That gaps in the record don't prove fabrication. They cite advances in carbon dating and dendrochronology. Tree rings, for example, suggest a continuous timeline with no missing centuries, but even here, the debate continues. Some claim the data is open to interpretation. That matching tree rings with historical events is not an exact science, and that if records are wrong, calibration may be too. It becomes a hall of mirrors. Every piece of evidence reflects another, until you can't tell what's real and what's not. And perhaps that's the point. History is not just what happened, it's what we believe happened, what we agree to remember. The phantom time hypothesis may be wrong, but it forces us to question the foundations of our past. Let's say, for a moment, the phantom time hypothesis is true, that 300 years of our history never happened. What does that actually mean for us today? Would it change the way we live, the way we think, or govern, or believe? Perhaps more than we realize. Because history is not just a story, it's a foundation. Our institutions rely on it. Our laws, our identities, even our religions. And if that foundation is false, the ripple effect is enormous. Let's begin with religion. Christianity, especially in Europe, is tightly woven into medieval history. The authority of the Catholic Church was shaped by events in those phantom centuries, from councils to coronations to sacred relics. But what if those events never happened? What happens to doctrine based on fictional time? 2 holidays calculated on a faulty calendar. What does it mean if we're not living in 2025, but 1727? Then there's the idea of nationhood. Countries trace their lineage to ancient empires. Kings and heroes anchor national myths, but many of those stories come from the early Middle Ages, from kingdoms that may not have existed, or whose records were retroactively written. The roots of modern Europe could be built on narrative sand, inventions shaped by politics, not truth, and that changes everything. Our understanding of power, our sense of continuity, even our wars. What if some of the conflicts we remember were based on forged claims, on borders and bloodlines that were never real? Then there's science. History anchors scientific milestones, inventions, discoveries, catastrophes. If the timeline is wrong, what else is misaligned? What about climate events, famines, plagues? Can we still trust the data? Even archaeology faces problems. If carbon dating relies on historical calibration and history is wrong, then even our scientific dating can be skewed, decades, maybe centuries off. Suddenly, the ground under our feet isn't so solid. But there's something more unsettling, something psychological. We build our lives on the concept of time. not just hours and minutes but centuries. We say things like 1,000 years ago, as if that time was clear, stable, and known. But what if it was fog? What if some of that past was invented? It means our identity is tangled with fiction. We might be living inside a story someone else wrote and call it history. Of course, mainstream historians reject the phantom time hypothesis. They say it's based on selective evidence, that it underestimates the complexity of medieval Europe, that real archaeology, linguistics, and climate records don't support it, and maybe they're right. Maybe Illig's theory is just that, a theory, an intellectual provocation, a reminder not to trust history blindly. But there's something valuable in that provocation. It forces us to ask difficult questions. How do we know what happened? How much of our past is reconstruction? How much is assumption? What's lost? And what's invented to fill the gaps? Because history isn't a perfect memory, it's fragments, stitched together with guesses by people with power. And every empire has shaped the past to justify the present. The Romans did it. The Church did it. The Enlightenment thinkers did it. Even modern textbooks do it. History is not neutral. It is edited, trimmed, rewritten, and sometimes, maybe even fabricated. The phantom time hypothesis may never be proven. It might be wrong in its details, but it touches a deeper truth, that we don't remember everything. That sometimes we remember what we're told. And what we're told depends on who's doing the telling. We like to think we live in a modern age, but what if this age started later than we think? What if our calendar is a curtain, and behind it, the real timeline lies hidden, lost in a fog of myth, forgeries, and forgotten truths? If history can be altered, then so can identity, so can meaning, so can destiny. Maybe it's not about whether 300 years were invented. Maybe it's about learning to question everything, because only by questioning do we come closer to truth. When Heribert Illig proposed the phantom time hypothesis, he didn't just challenge dates. He challenged authority, because questioning history means questioning those who preserve it. The historians, the archaeologists, the institutions, and not everyone took it kindly. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Academics dismissed the theory as fringe nonsense, pseudo-history. They called it a dangerous distortion of the past. But what made it so threatening? Why such strong resistance? The answer lies in trust. History depends on it. We trust that dates are correct, that documents are authentic, that scholars have checked the facts. When someone claims the foundation is false, it shakes everything. Illig wasn't just questioning a few kings. He was questioning the integrity of an entire timeline, and that makes people uncomfortable, especially those who built careers defending it. Critics pointed to evidence Illig ignored, like dendrochronology tree ring dating. They showed continuous growth patterns from before 614 to after 911, no mysterious gap, no missing centuries. They also cited astronomical records, eclipses that matched the historical timeline, events that wouldn't make sense if 300 years were invented. And they turned to documents, legal texts, charters, contracts, thousands of them, scattered across Europe. Too many, they argued. Too fake, too detailed to forge. These documents reflect real events, real property, real people. Could an entire continent fabricate that much history? It seems unlikely. Then there's Islamic history, Chinese records, other civilizations outside of Europe. Their timelines don't show a 300-year gap. They describe events that line up with the same period. If time was invented in Europe, why does it match elsewhere? Critics argue that this alone disproves the theory, that history isn't a closed European bubble. And yet, Illig's questions linger, because some things don't add up, like the architectural gaps, the sudden burst of cultural activity after long silences, the too perfect biographies of kings and emperors, the strange absence of certain coins, tools, or art. These anomalies don't vanish just because we don't like the theory, and that's the uncomfortable part. Even if Illig is wrong, he forces a conversation about how we know what we know, about who decides what counts as truth, and whether that truth is open to revision. Mainstream historians stand firm. They say the evidence for continuous time is overwhelming, that while gaps exist, they're normal in ancient history. We don't have to invent lost centuries to explain them, but others are more cautious. They agree that history is not perfect, that some parts of the record are shaky, that mistakes, misdatings, and forgeries do exist, and if small distortions can survive for centuries, couldn't larger ones too? Not everyone who defends the timeline is hiding something, but not everyone who questions it is crazy either. Sometimes it takes an outsider to spot what insiders miss. That's what Illig tried to be. Not a hoaxer, but a skeptic. Not a denier of history, but a challenger of its assumptions. And while his conclusions may not hold, his method still matters, because history should not be a sacred text. It should be open to investigation, even uncomfortable investigation, especially then. The phantom time hypothesis teaches us something powerful. Not that 300 years were fake, but that certainty itself is fragile. That history is full of shadows and edits, of gaps and guesses. and that the job of a historian isn't to protect the timeline, it's to test it relentlessly. Because the past is not just behind us, it lives inside the present, in the systems we trust, the beliefs we teach, the dates on our calendars and gravestones. If we get that wrong, we mislead the future. Illig may have been wrong about the phantom years, but he was right about one thing. Time is not just math, it's memory, it's power, and it can be shaped, hidden, and rewritten. Until now, our focus has been on Europe. The phantom time theory was born there, after all. But history is not only European. If 300 years were fabricated in the West, what about the rest of the world? Could other civilizations confirm or contradict the timeline? Let's begin with the Islamic world. In the 7th century, Islam was born in Arabia. The Prophet Muhammad died in 630 AD. His followers launched a vast expansion, conquering territory across the Middle East, North Africa, and Spain. These events are well documented in Arabic, not Latin, by people outside the influence of the Holy Roman Empire. And the Islamic calendar is lunar, not solar, operating on a different cycle from the Gregorian calendar. So if Europe had invented 300 years, Islamic history would show a discrepancy, but it doesn't. Muslim scholars wrote extensively from the 7th century onward with consistent records of wars, scholars, dynasties. Cities like Baghdad and Cordoba became centers of knowledge, hosting libraries, astronomers, poets. Can all of that be fiction? Highly unlikely. Then we turn east to China. During the supposed phantom period, the Tang dynasty ruled China from 618 to 907 AD. A time of flourishing culture, art, and governance. Chinese historians kept detailed records. Emperors, eclipses, disasters, diplomatic missions. They even documented contact with Arab traders and Buddhist pilgrims, events that align with Islamic and even Byzantine timelines. These records weren't written to match Europe. They were independent, which makes them vital. If 300 years were missing, Chinese records would break the illusion, but they don't. Instead, they confirm it. The same applies to Japan. The Nara and Heian periods stretched through the 8th and 9th centuries with imperial decrees, Buddhist texts, and early novels. Japan's timeline flows without strange gaps. In South Asia, empires like the Gurjara Pratihara and the Pala ruled. They built temples, issued coins, fought wars with inscriptions and art dated to the Phantom period. Africa, too, holds timelines. Kingdoms like Ghana and Axum rose and traded during these centuries. Oral history is aligned with archaeological finds. These weren't European colonies. They had no reason to adopt a fake timeline. Yet their dates still match, even in the Americas. Civilizations like the Maya and Zapotec kept calendars. Their astronomy and rituals match known solar events, and none suggests a 300-year confusion. In short, the rest of the world disagrees with the phantom time hypothesis, or rather disproves it, because history is global, and time can't be rewritten in just one region, not without others noticing. The deeper we look, the more clear it becomes. The phantom time hypothesis is a uniquely Eurocentric theory. It centers on Holy Roman emperors, popes, and Frankish kings. It ignores the broader clockwork of the world, where centuries passed with vibrant motion, trade flowed, art evolved, wars raged, people lived and died documented in different tongues. That doesn't mean all timelines are perfect. Every culture has its myths, its legends, its rewritings. But inventing 300 years across civilizations, that's not just unlikely, it's impossible. Still, some defenders of the theory press on. They say global dates may be off due to European influence in modern scholarship, that calendars were recent retroactively, but this theory breaks under scrutiny because many non-European records were preserved locally, without Christian or Gregorian intervention in India, in Arabia, in the Far East. The records persist, and they show time flowing forward without phantom gaps. So why does the theory still persist? Perhaps because it offers something seductive, the idea that we're living in a manufactured world. That reality is less fixed than we thought. That someone, somewhere, rewrote time and no one noticed. It's a powerful story, a modern myth. And myths don't need facts to survive. They need emotion, doubt, curiosity. The phantom time hypothesis is more than a theory. It's a mirror, held up to our obsession with control, with knowing the past completely. But the past doesn't always cooperate. It's fragmented, weathered, imperfect. And sometimes, that makes it more human. The phantom time hypothesis may not hold up to global scrutiny, and yet it refuses to die out. Why? Why are we drawn to a theory that most historians reject? The answer lies not in history books but in human psychology. There is something haunting about the idea of lost time. It speaks to a quiet fear we all carry. The fear that what we've been taught is incomplete, or worse and true. The idea that time can be manipulated unsettles us, but it also excites us. It makes the world feel mysterious again, like stepping into a secret room behind the timeline, where history bends, where truths slip between the cracks, and in that room we wonder, what else don't we know? The phantom time hypothesis feeds that curiosity because it flips the script. It turns the authority of textbooks into a question mark, and some people find freedom in that. If history can be edited, then perhaps nothing is fixed. Identity, nation, belief all become fluid. That can be terrifying, but also liberating. And then there's the allure of being part of a secret. To believe in phantom time is to see what others can't. To be awake in a world sleepwalking through false centuries. It creates a sense of meaning, of special insight. Conspiracy theories often offer this illusion. Not just an explanation, but a place in the story. A role to play against hidden powers. A heroic position and a narrative of deception. It's not really about facts. It's about belief. About longing for truth in a confusing world. And that longing is deeply human. But it comes at a cost. When we stop trusting history, we start drifting, floating between fragments and fictions, unsure of what to hold. That's the danger of phantom thinking. It starts with the question, then becomes suspicion, then dissolves into a void, and in that void, anything goes, time loses shape, truth becomes optional, and we're left with only stories, some told, some sold. The phantom time hypothesis thrives in this void, because it gives form to the formless. It puts structure around doubt, a theory to explain the unease. The sense that history doesn't always make sense. That some gaps feel too wide. Some kings to legendary. Some centuries to quiet. But gaps aren't proof of conspiracy. They're part of history itself. Because the past was not designed to be remembered, it left fragments, coins, bones, letters, ruins. And from those, we build stories, not perfect, not complete, but earnest attempts to understand what came before, to reach across centuries and touch forgotten hands. And maybe that's enough. We don't need to believe that 300 years were invented. We can still wonder, still question, but with humility, with care, with reverence for the messiness of memory. Because history is not a lie, it's a puzzle. Some pieces lost, some distorted, some still waiting to be found. And every generation must decide what to do with the gaps. Fill them with myths, or sit quietly with the unknown. The phantom time hypothesis reminds us how easily truth can bend. How stories, once told often enough, become real. But it also reminds us that questioning is vital. That nothing is above examination, not even time itself. We need skeptics. We need dreamers. We need those who ask, what if? But we also need grounding. We need evidence, method, and care. Because history is not entertainment. It is our collective memory, the record of who we are. And if we lose it to fantasy, we lose ourselves. So ask questions, always. Doubt the timeline if you must, but respect the weight of proof. And the quiet labor of those who piece the past together, stone by stone, word by word. Till a picture begins to form, not perfect, but real, not a phantom, but a presence, a time that was and still echoes through us. That's it for today's Forgotten Tale. If this story made you raise an eyebrow, or don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that dusty little bell so you never miss another echo from the past. Drop it in the comments. We're always listening for new echoes. Got a weird bit of history you think we should cover? Until next time, keep your curiosity loud and your history weird. That's it for today's Forgotten Tale. If this story made you